Hey, it's Soul with another video. If you could, please hit the like button out of pure faith in today's content and subscribe to the channel and all that stuff. And today, we're going to talk about Torghast. We had such high hopes for it once upon a time, right? It had random encounters, it had crazy powers, it had solo content, and most importantly, it had problems. As cathartic as it is, we're not here to talk so much about the problems and the complaints, but I'm sure I'll be able to squeeze it in between the lines. But I want to point out that in a few short months, maybe sooner, Shadowlands will enter its fourth and I guess final season. We all know what's happening in this upcoming season 4. There's going to be like some experiments with the big three, with restoring and rotating the Shadowlands raids. There's going to be a sort of new lineup of Mythic Plus dungeons, and well, I guess Solo Shuffle Rated isn't coming quite yet, so they're just getting a new PvP season. But anyway, what about solo players? What about the people who do not want to go back to them same old raids and dungeons and battlegrounds? I'd like to think that there's time before this next season, so I want to sell you folks and the WoW team on some ideas to give Torghast, or specifically the Jailer's Gauntlet, I guess, one last hurrah before it's unceremoniously abandoned in favor of Dragonflight. Let's keep this in mind though. I've got suggestions, but for all we know, the WoW team could announce something anytime before the season starts, and this video will age like milk, although most of them do anyway. So let's address the obvious question. Why bother? It's the end of the expansion, right? And the idea of an experimental season applies to season content and not world or solo content. That's what the little bits of questing for the Blood Elves and the Dwarves are for, right? And Torghast, of all places, really? Like, that's a feature that's gonna lose relevance after Shadowlands. The WoW team, they had their try on it, right? We got what we got, and I guess we should just move on. The answer to that, though, is both obvious and a little bit difficult to accept. There's just a lot of people who do solo content, and I truly believe, that if Season 4 is just for the big three, the raids, the dungeons, and the PvP stuffs, and the rest of the players are left to like diddle around farming for Covenant cosmetics and the Mage Tower, that's kind of a disservice to the silent majority, don't you think? And why Torghast, right? Why not do something to make world content more relevant and challenging? Why this thing that has been loathed by so many from all walks of life? Now, I'd like to think that the loathing came from it feeling mandatory for crafting legendaries. It was loathed because it got super repetitive thanks to crafting legendaries. And here's my biggest gripe. It wasn't used as a path to grow stronger, at least beyond legendaries. Like, you see the pattern here? The WoW team put all of the legendary eggs in one Torghast-shaped basket, and both features ended up suffering for it. And yet the very fundamental features of Torghast inherently positions itself as a great way to offer repeatable content and challenge and growth, because you might have noticed, but Season 4 is being made by kind of a budget team. No doubt the bulk of the WoW team is hard at work on Dragonflight. Season 4 is, well, not to insult them, but Season 4 is basically the recycling and remixing of already existing assets. Maybe there is a great way of revamping world content in Shadowlands, or maybe even other zones in 9.2.5, which is coming very soon, to create this sort of progressive loop. Keep in mind that this video here is being published while the patch is deploying, meaning by the time you watch this, you can comment on how fantastically wrong I am. But I still believe that Torghast, specifically the Jailer's Gauntlet, has untapped potential that can be very easily unlocked. So let's finally get to it and talk up some ideas. The Jailer's Gauntlet has positioned itself to be a good template for setting up gear progression very similar to Horrific Visions, the one-patch feature that came at the end of Battle for Azeroth. Big highlights of it were that it gave random but guaranteed loot upon successful completion, and loot locked you for that week. Now, unlike Horrific Visions, Torghast can be run without a key, making that a very nice plus. Of course, the Jailer's Gauntlet will have its difficulty bumped up to suit Season 4 content, meaning everything in there is scaled for a higher item level. As you know, the Gauntlet features 8 layers of increasing difficulty and frustration. This idea will take the loot model from Horrific Visions and just kind of slap it into Torghast, meaning that we're going to get something like this. Like, seriously, here's the chart. Look. So each layer is going to award a single piece of gear, chosen at random, that can be obtained once a week. So let's cover a few examples. Let's pretend that you cleared a layer 8. Yay! You get a random piece of gear with an item level of 298. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more on item level later, don't worry. Now that you did beat a layer 8 though, you're loot locked to that layer, or at least the layer's rewards for the week. Let's say that in the same week, your friend wants help with clearing their layer 8. So you can go in, you can go help them, and you clear that. Your friend will receive a 298 for their first clear of the week, while you get the next best reward, a 292. Just like Horrific Visions, the reward that you obtain is based on the highest difficulty reward that you have not yet obtained. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. So far, so good. Or is it? Because as armchair designers, we've got to consider player behavior. Consider that Raid Finder, which will have all of its wings open when Season 4 begins, and has an item level requirement of 240 to get in, awards 265 faded pieces. By comparison, that makes the Gauntlet look like a reasonable starting off point for people who want to push and get gear. Problems arise though, thanks to there being no keys to entering Torghast or the Jailer's Gauntlet, and personally, I prefer it to be that way. Still, in theory, a determined team could farm up all the rewards from the Gauntlet and get like 8 pieces of gear a week just from here. Sure, after a while, only a few pieces will be worth obtaining, but this easily makes the Gauntlet the most efficient way to gear early on, and the last thing that I want to see happening is what I call toe stepping. That's where one path of gearing is so demonstrably better than the other paths when they're supposed to be relatively equal that it disrupts participation. That's what happened in Season 1 of Shadowlands, when PvP gearing was the way to go. It's okay to have preferred methods, but not to the point where the non-preferred methods are virtually irrelevant. So maybe the Horrific Vision model doesn't quite work. I think it's pretty close though, so instead of direct gear rewards, how about a more indirect method of currency rewards at the end of a run instead? So let's change the chart, and I'll throw up some pretend numbers because I'm not very good at designing currency-based rewards. This scheme will work the same way as the original Torghast rewards did, when clearing a layer got you the currency from that layer plus all the layers below it. Meaning if someone cleared an 8, they could get all the currency they can get for that week. From there, they can go to a vendor inside Torghast and buy a loot box, who sells a common, an uncommon, a rare, and an epic loot box to sort of kind of contextualize raid difficulties like Raid Finder, Normal, Heroic, and Mythic. The idea here is to challenge players to get as much of this currency as their skill level allows, and then spend it on these loot boxes. So as a very rough example, in a given week, if a player cleared an 8, a layer 8, they can get pretty close to buying an epic box, or they can use that currency to buy like 2 common boxes, or they can save their currency for next week, and definitely buy an epic box and maybe a rare box too once they clear another layer 8. One issue that comes to mind is alt friendliness. It's a common challenge in currency-based features like this. To that, there are lots of ideas, but I have one, and that's to make the boxes themselves account-wide. You'll still be putting in the work to obtain them, but if you want to boost your freshly leveled 60 with a bunch of heroic item level gear straight away, yeah, what's the problem with that? I think this is a more elegant approach than, say, making the currency itself tradable account-wide, because then one would be able to just funnel it all into one character, and that character would have very high-level gear, even if they might not have ever cleared a high-level layer of the Gauntlet at all. Now, you might have noticed the item level in the earlier examples. The gear that one would get is being offered at 6 item levels lower than the actual Mythic gear in Season 4, and that's intentional. It's my idea, but this is intentional because, again, toe stepping. Actually, I'll make my views on gearing from Torghast more clear here. Season 4 is already going to add faded gear to raids, and a token to gradually upgrade faded gear to higher item levels. Gear from Torghast, in this imagining of mine, won't have that faded attribute, because if they did, then Torghast and raiding would be kind of sort of merged together. Like, we would get questions about, okay, these faded tokens and upgrades and how they would work together. Can I get tokens from Torghast and apply it to heroic gear, or tokens from heroic raid things and apply it to... Things will get really weird, all right? And we're better off with Torghast gear being its own thing. I feel like the gear from Torghast ought to come mostly from random. and non-targeted loot boxes. I mean, okay, total randomness is frustrating, yes, but we've also got to acknowledge that we're adding another way of gearing to the game. We're not moving anything around, we're not revamping other stuff, we're adding one additional thing. People who don't play in the big three, solo players and the like, they're going to look at Torghast as the place to progress. I think the best intentions are for Torghast to feel like a complementary place to progress for the other players, for people who play in the big three. They shouldn't see it as required to progress. I mean, they will, but they definitely shouldn't look at Torghast gear as the best, as a source of best in slot gear. That's not the only reason why item levels are slightly lower in Torghast, because this would also disqualify the gear from being used to unlock mythic appearances from the creation catalyst. Now, folks who run Mythic Plus know this. Fully upgraded mythic gear will only unlock the heroic appearances at best. You'd need to run a 15 and get a piece from the vault, and then use the catalyst to create that mythic sort of appearance. Now, I know that this will turn some people off, but this is me trying to give a little bit of room for discussion and compromise here. I'm not asking for everyone to have a pony, and I'm not trying to make certain folks feel so left out. Toe stepping is a real phenomenon that discourages people from playing because their accomplishments may feel diminished, just like how impossible to get rewards discourages people who aren't up for the challenge. The WoW team has taken strides to make more content accessible, but it's well within their design intent to draw a line somewhere and present to players the challenge to cross that line, even when they know that a lot of folks won't. Now let's put player power aside for just a moment. Some may have noticed that despite running lots of Torghast, there are still a lot of appearances left unlocked. I think that after the gear is obtained, however long that takes, players can and should be able to buy random loot boxes containing these Torghast cosmetics that typically drop from bosses. Actually, now that I think about it, maybe the gear obtained from Torghast could be another color of SFO gear, or maybe the other raids too, but I think that goes well beyond the scope of trying to set up a, so-called budget season. I think I'd be happy enough to have just decent gear, even if it happened to look the same as like leveling gear or dungeon gear as a lot of stuff does now. And that sucks, but I'd live with it. Anyway, other rewards from slamming the Jailer's Gauntlets could include perks for the Gauntlet that can be traded to alt. Now imagine a perk that you can trade to an alt that lets an extra epic power appear right at the start. I think that's pretty huge, and it lends another bit of alt friendliness without being like a total loot giveaway. Of course, more stuff can come from this vendor, like buying barrels of anima or bags of grateful offerings, or how about some of the other Covenant-specific materials like the spirits for the Queen's Conservatory, the medallions of service for the Kyrian, and so on and so forth. And I think for me, I'm pretty stuck. I'm pretty sold on this whole currency idea. It seems pretty simple to understand, and it seems like it's something that the team can feasibly execute on within a few months. There are other ideas that I heard people talk about for Season 4 and of Torghast. For example, having the Jailer's Gauntlet or Torghast cell block runs beyond the Great Vault. That's not so bad of an idea. The Great Vault is inherently a feature that gives one selection, one choice still, so Big 3 players will definitely ignore running Torghast. That is, unless Torghast will offer rewards based on the dungeon or raid loot tables, then suddenly it becomes pretty much required for Mythic Plus players to maximize their number of choices. And again, I'm not too fond of toe stepping, and this would be like long-term toe stepping. There are other ideas that I've seen across the internet, but none that fit the scope of work that I think is being put into Season 4. Our best hopes orbit around whatever the heck encrypted stuff is coming in this upcoming patch, which could possibly set the stage for Season 4 content. I just think that there's a little bit more that can be squeezed out of the Jailer's Gauntlet. And that's all that I managed to figure out, but I invite you to this thought exercise to see what we can come up with. I went with this one with one arm tied behind my back, only considering like small things that can be done in just a few months. But what do you think of the plan? What are some ideas or wishes that you have? Share all that stuff in a comment. Like the video, subscribe for more content, and I will see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.